Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
What's a crazy story you've wanted to tell?
Episode 2.
My senior year of high school we submitted senior quotes for the yearbook, and my friends and I thought it would be a funny idea to submit a quote on behalf of another friend. Nothing better than cute boys at the beach, love. Friend whose quote we changed told his mom told the school told the cops. On the first day of graduation practice, which was the last week of high school forever for me, myself and two friends got suspended, banned from walking at graduation, and 3 felony charges from the police officers handling the situation. Soon after, we were handcuffed and taken to the main jail where, due to not being able to pay the $60,000 bail, we were booked into cells, got our jail clothes, and spent a little over 24 hours there. Charges have been dropped since, but what a shitty way to end high school. Alright, here's my go-to-party story. It's about a friend of mine named Will who got herpes. Here is his story. I met Will in elementary school and we became fast friends. We were thought of as pretty cool back then because we knew what fun was and we made a lot of poop jokes. This is what made you cool in 5th grade, I guess. Well, in 6th grade we were forced to go our separate ways as Will went to a private school, while I went to the local public school. Unfortunately, we drifted apart because of this and I didn't see Will again for years. About a third of the way through senior year of high school I received some exciting news. Will was transferring to my high school. Well, next week Will arrive and he was a changed man. Will liked drugs, lots of drugs. I like drugs too, but not nearly as much or as many drugs as Will. Will experimented with pretty much any drug you can think of and was on something pretty much all the time. A few examples: Will liked to do MDMA in class. I have no idea how he was able to do this because I can't sit still or be quiet while rolling. Frankly, that sounds like hell. He was high on acid a lot. He took a lot of that in class. One time he was drunk for about 3 weeks straight because he was afraid of the hangover he would get when he finally sobered up. Suffice to say, the kid liked to be held up. One day Will was at his house hanging out with another friend of ours named Eric. Will decided to smoke some crack. The crack must have made Will pretty horny because he went on Craigslist to find a hooker. He found a cheap, drive-to-your-house hooker on Craigslist that was only $100. The picture was pretty hot too. Picture a hot Italian chick with long brown hair, bright eyes, and a pretty substantial rack. Will decided that she was the one he wanted, so he stole $100 from his little brother and called the number. Now, if there is one thing I have learned in my life, it's this: if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. In this instance this proved to be correct. About 45 minutes later a beat-up old black car pulls up to the driveway and out walks the hooker. She did not look the same as the picture. In fact, she didn't look even close to anything like the girl in the picture. The hooker was not a young Italian chick, but a middle-aged black woman. She was about 180 to 200 pounds and was probably about 45 years old. I later asked Will, if it wasn't what you thought you were paying for, why did you do it? To which he responded, well, most hookers carry guns and I didn't want to get shot. To which I replied, why didn't you just give her the money? His answer was that he didn't think about that because he was high on crack and extremely horny. I thought that was a good enough excuse. Well, to make a long story short, Will did the dirty deed with the dirty hooker. A few days later he had a burning sensation when he peed, so he went to the doctor. Unfortunately for him it was herpes. He later told me that his dick looked like Wolverine tried to eat it. Here's the kicker: this is his virginity story. Yeah, he lost it to a hooker and got herpes. On the bright side, he is doing much better now as he went through rehab and is now in college working on getting a degree. I'm also pretty sure he is still drug-free. When I went to elementary school there were two boys who were in the special needs class who were probably around 12 to 13 when I was about 9 years old. We'll call them Dave and Matt. They were both retarded in what would seem to be a similar way, except that whatever kind of retarded they had, Dave got the lion's share of the retarded. It is important to note that at this point in time I had the stature of Ralphie from A Christmas Story, and these guys looked kind of like Anor from Final Fight on the SNES. I know we're all supposed to be really liberal about these sorts of things, but at that time the teachers would always tell us that these guys were just like any normal boys. But as an example of what it was like to contend with them, one time one of them cornered me in the bathroom and said, "Wanna see my dick?" and I ran away crying and screaming. So really these guys should have been well segregated from Gen Pop. This is something that happened to me when I was 9 and I had no idea how to deal with it because hippie teachers just kind of rolled with these incidents. Anyway, we all attended a summer day camp thing together, which during the weeks was at the school, and Dave and Matt came to that camp too and were basically super best friends. We all hung out in the gym and some of my friends dared me to sneak up behind the curtain and onto the stage to see what was up there. This area of course was out of bounds. So I do it and I'm up there nosing around when all of a sudden Dave, the one with the lion's share of special needs, sneaked up on me and began choking me, presumably to death, for no reason. I thought I was going to die. I couldn't yell out and no one could see us behind the curtain. I gave him a little shove and he tripped up over his own 2 feet, stumbled backwards and got tangled up in the stage curtains, so when he fell the 4 feet to the hard gym floor he fell head first and split his head open. I probably should have just bolted, but I ran out past the curtains to look at all the other campers looking at me, and I was looking at what I had done. It was like a Shakespearean tragedy as I was just standing there aghast, metaphorical dagger in hand. Then to top it off, his buddy Matt pushed past the crowd and cradled Dave's body in his arms and started screaming, "You killed him! You killed him!" until the hangover camp counselor teens picked him up and dragged him away like Sean Penn in Mystic River. Epilogue. I told them what happened and I never got in trouble and I never saw Dave again and no one seems to know what happened to him. Matt forgave me though, I guess. He hasn't brought it up anyway. He's a pretty good guy, I see him around every now and then. One time I ran into him at a gas station and he started talking about how he just bought a used truck and gas was really expensive and that he wished that when gas went down it would just stay down and that he didn't understand why it went up and down. The guy is retarded, give him a break. Some first-year economics guy overheard us and turned around and started explaining the supply and demand curves and the concept of market equilibrium to Matt as a way to explain the volatility of fuel costs. He even started making swooping motions in the air with his hands to show the intersecting curves on an imaginary graph. I couldn't just interrupt the guy to let the guy know that, hey, this guy has no idea what you're talking about because he is retarded, because Matt was right there and I think you're not supposed to tell retarded people that they are retarded or something. I just had to stand there in the gas station and watch this insufferable dude give a lecture to a retarded person on the first chapter of his microeconomics course. This story has no point and seems to have gone off the rails. Oh well, I like stories. This was 4 years ago when I was a freshman in high school. I had a best friend, I'll call her Deli. Deli was able to make it into show choir, dream of hers, by randomly showing up at the choir director's door and singing impromptu. Fast forward to competition season, she's got very few friends because she's a crazy little ADD hyperactive shit who took nothing seriously and had no desire to make anyone's life better. She basically did whatever she thought was funny with no regards to consequences for her or others. So she's walking around with my other friend, I introduced them, I'll call her Jem. Jem and Deli get to go on a break and they decide to go to some really ghetto strip mall near the high school. So they walk past this shitty little pet shop and Deli sees this albino rat. She thought it was cute and that its cage wasn't a good enough home, so she bought it for only $1. She felt so awesome for saving this rat from its life at the pet shop. She thought it was going to be eaten by a larger pet. Then she remembers she's at a show choir competition about 3 hours away from her house and she spent her actual last dollar on the rat. Nobody is going to buy her stupid rat a cage since it only cost her $1. Like I said, she didn't have many friends besides Jem and a few others. So now where is this rat going to go for the rest of the day and during the bus ride home? Well, some guy bought Deli and the rat a Caesar salad in a to-go box. So for the afternoon, the rat lived in the box of salad, probably doing just fine munching on salad. Unfortunately, the dressing was pre-mixed into the lettuce and other ingredients, so the whole setup was pretty slimy. A few glitches happened during the ride home, but not crucial to the story. Mostly everyone just hated Deli even more because she once again did something stupid and crazy without regard to future health of the rat. By the way, she named him Caesar Salad. So she gets home and hides the rat from her mom, because her mom is a crazy psycho, other stories abound, and also because she can't have a pet rat. Her mom would freak if she found out about the salad box. So Deli asks me to take him in as my pet. I've never been allowed to have a pet and my parents didn't change their mind for Caesar salad either. So the weekend has passed and on Monday I get the bright idea to give the rat to my science teacher because she didn't have a class pet yet, and she liked me pretty well, didn't know my best friend though. Everything goes well and Deli brings the rat to school to give to me so I can give it to my teacher. The same friend who bought the salad also happened to have a spare rat cage lying around and gave it to me so my teacher couldn't say no. I always left my locker unlocked and told her to put the little guy in my locker. By the way, he's still in the box, and Deli hasn't cleaned it or changed any of the lettuce out or even let the rat out for a little. So she tells me she's made the drop-off. After school I go to my locker, open it up, and the box isn't in there. She's sure she put it in there. We assume it got stolen or whoever found it in their locker let it outside or something. So for the rest of the week we laugh about how silly it is. Then on Friday my best friend tries checking the other lockers in case someone still had it in there and happened to leave it unlocked. So Friday after school we find it after trying to open like 50 lockers near mine. Deli is very dumb at this age, so despite my clear instructions including my locker number, she got the wrong locker. We're ecstatic because we found him. The rat looms terrible. He's yellow and wet and matted, surely scared and covered in poop and pee and nearly suffocating. The box is so slimy. It's horrifying. Just our luck, my teacher is gone that day. So we took him in her room and left him in the cage I made for him over the weekend. No food, no water. Keep in mind that the rat has been treated like trash for over a week now, and it's basically my entire friend's fault. At one point she wanted to be a vet, after that he got great care from my teacher and he was an awesome rat. Oh, and my teacher refused to call him Caesar Salad, because she obviously didn't support his cruel treatment. But she did call him Caesar. So Caesar lived out his days eating pencils and nibbling on my finger. He got an armpit tumor roughly a year after he was purchased and a different teacher threw him into our town's river. Plastic surgery is a lot like painting a deck. Until you paint your deck that first time, you never need to worry about painting it. But as soon as you paint it that first time, you now need to keep painting it over and over to make sure it always looks good. And then eventually will come a time when you're painting your deck and you notice that your fence just quite isn't that brilliant tone of red you remember it being. Since you're already painting, why not paint your fence too? So now you're sitting on your deck enjoying your wonderful fence, when you notice that the color of your grill is just not right and is making your deck look hideous. Paint that shit too. So now you're eating burgers on your deck when you look over your superb fence and see your neighbor taking care of their grass. Their grass looks better than yours and that just won't do. So you think about it and since painting things has turned out so well, leave it, paint that grass. And that's how plastic surgery is a lot like painting a deck. Last year I was put into a class with a guy that was, shall we say, an egg or two short of a dozen. Quite a nice dude nonetheless. When he wasn't being a wacky bastard you could have a reasonable conversation with him without any problems. Authority didn't really appeal to him at all. He would rock into class with a portable external hard drive with a load of video games on it, i.e. Doom, Tomb Raider and more, and just sit there playing them. If a teacher asked him to stop, he would for a little bit then just resume playing. The guy was a real nerd, I guess, which was strange because he came from an area that was renowned for being quite rough and he would be really out of place there. There were a few instances throughout the year of just sheer madness on his part. During one class, we were asked to present a presentation on the impact of IT on society or something to that effect. It gets to his turn, he fires up the presentation and gets going. Some of the other guys in the class were talking to each other while he was up there, and at one point one of them tried to get the other's attention by waving his arm in the air. For whatever reason this guy, let's call him Bob, decides it would be nothing but appropriate to stop the presentation and call this guy out. Fair enough, he was being rude and not paying attention to him. But Bob interprets the wave as a Nazi salute, asks the guy, "What were you doing there? Heil Hitler or some shit," and throws out a salute of his own. Our teacher was a pretty strict black woman. No one knows how to react, dead silence. She, seemingly unfazed by this little skit, just asks him to carry on. Another time, we're in a class with this teacher who could be described as a perfect stereotype of the awkward uncle who always tells bad jokes. We get in and this class is no different, but this is Bob's first time in this class. After the teacher finished telling another of his awful jokes, Bob turns around from his game of Doom, gets the teacher's attention and says, "What do you call a Japanese pedophile?" Again, dead silence. The teacher acts as though he didn't hear it and carries on the class as normal. As soon as we got out, everyone bursts out laughing and asking the guy why he thought that joke would be appropriate, to which he just responds, "Meh, I think it was funny." There were lots of other little instances like these scattered throughout the year, and by the end we all loved him and were sad to see him go. The course only lasted a year and he told us he wouldn't be returning to do any more courses. He was like 21. And it turned out he had been there doing courses similar to the one we did for the previous 3 years or something, and all the teachers had grown familiar with his antics, which is why they all responded so calmly and never gave him any shit for it. I really do miss Bob. On top of all the funny weird shit he did, he was a nice dude too. Over the summer, the pool that I work at hired most of the lifeguards as maintenance workers for the pool painting project that had been put off for years. We had to wear face masks, made us all look like Bane. It was cool, because of the paint fumes. A couple weeks into the project, we all took our lunch break in the main office/entrance. Because we are all slow, lazy, the trash can is overflowing and no one wants to take it out to the dumpster. So we call one of the newer lifeguards, B, who is constantly forgetting about shifts and showing up late despite living about a block away. We call him and ask him where he is, and if he knew about his shift that started just now. Even though the pool has been closed for weeks, B falls for it and says he'll be there in 5. There are about 7 of us in the office. We all get up on desks and counters and do this weird perch squat thing. Some of us have our masks on. One lifeguard, S, is up on the counter next to the door and is right about face level with anyone who would happen to walk in. B should show up any second now. Everyone is giggling a little bit. The door starts to open. S is making a weird-ass croaking noise and slowly begins to lean in towards who he quickly realizes is not B at all, but some poor old man who just happened to wander in. This guy stares at us. "I just need a schedule." We give him a schedule and apologize. He laughs nervously and leaves pretty quickly. By the time B shows up, we're all crying on the floor. He takes out the trash, calls us mean names, and ends up staying to work. My favorite memory from work by far. Okay, here's a longer story but definitely the most WTF moment for me while tripping. So the day starts with my 2 friends and me each taking 2 hits of acid. For one of my friends and me this was our first time taking more than 1 tab. So we come up on the tabs, go for a walk, typical tripping stuff. So like 4 hours into the trip, we are back at my friend's apartment. The day prior, I had left my jacket in another friend's car and we had talked about meeting up so I could grab it. He was nice enough to offer to come to our place to drop it off. So he calls me when gets there and says, "Hey, the magic flight, I'm here but there are a bunch of police in front of the apartment." I look out the window and see like 3 cop cars parked on the street. Now, I was tripping but I felt comfortable enough to just go outside and grab a jacket from my friend. Easy, right? Wrong. So I opened the apartment door and walked down the stairs. I open the front door to the apartment complex, which you cannot see through, and the second I open it, boom. I'm greeted by a drunken guy and 4 police officers. The drunk grabs me lightly and says, "Hey man, you got money?" The police officer puts his hand on my shoulder and says, "Do you know this guy?" To which I immediately respond, "No," and push his shoulder off me and walk past them. At this point all I'm thinking is, what is it? I walk out to the street as I watch the entire officers storm the apartment building. I grab the jacket from my friend and say thanks. I still have no clue what is going on but I didn't want to walk back in through the front door so I decided I would try the back door. I walk around the entire complex, up the back stairs and open the door to my friend's place. I am immediately greeted by my 2 tripping friends screaming at me. "What the magic flight, what is going on, what did you do?" So this is where the story changes from my perspective to theirs. So right after I left the apartment earlier, the drunken guy had walked up the stairs and opened the front door to my friend's apartment. My friends who are still tripping balls all think that this is my friend dropping off the jacket, they didn't know him. The drunken guy just walks into the apartment and walks right up to my friends. My friends, thinking that this is my friend dropping the jacket off, stand up to shake hands with him. Then the drunk says, "Hey, you guys got $30 I can borrow?" My friends then start to realize that this is not the Magic Flight's friend, but just some random drunk guy who just walked into their apartment. At that moment my friends look towards the door and standing at the entrance to the door are all of the police officers just staring into the apartment. Keep in mind, we have 2 bongs, an oil rig, jars of weed, my friend was actually growing at the time, speed, acid, Molly all just chilling on my friend's coffee table which is in plain view from the doorway. My friends ushered the drunkard out of the apartment and my friend says, "What is going on? Does that guy need help?" to the officers who are just as useless as the drunk dude. They say sorry and then one of the officers says, "We got him, but maybe you should come with us too." As some sort of joke, hysterical. Right? No. They close the door and lock it. That's when I walk in the back door. We watched them talking to this drunken guy for like another 45 minutes before they just let him go. We still have no idea what happened. Now, I understand this story doesn't sound that crazy but trust me when I say this, when this shit happens to you when you're tripping balls on acid for your first time, it was quite traumatic at the time. We did continue to trip and have a good time though. And it's quite the story to tell at parties, haha. Words and symbols mean different things to different people. Lots of people see the Confederate flag as a symbol of racial oppression, slavery, etc. Lots of people, however, see the Confederate flag as a symbol of states' rights and resistance of government overreach. I'm not going to get into a debate about which is which, but where I live, most people understand it to be the latter. I live in the Bible Belt. So, at my high school, many years ago, when we were up against an almost entirely black basketball team, some jackasses decided to bring a Confederate flag and wave it around while shouting, "niggers," and whatnot. This gave the Confederate flag a bad rep at my school. Years after this happened, some chicks came to school with purses that had Confederate flags on them that they had gotten for Christmas. Principal said, "You can't have that here, leave these in the office." They said, "No," got suspended, and filed a lawsuit. Seriously. This kind of continued the whole taboo nature of the flag. So, years after that, I'm in a class where we have to make our own time capsule, along with an explanation of why we included each of the things. In my time capsule were, among other things, an empty beer bottle, Bible belt, remember, a Confederate flag, and bullet casings. My teacher was not amused, and wrote me up for it. Went to the vice principal's office the next day. He had already talked to the principal and they decided they were going to give me a day or two of after-school detention. This was a very mild slap on the wrist. I knew someone that had brought condoms in their time capsule and gotten 3 days of islands for it, but I had connections. Nonetheless, I called bullshit, and insisted that he show me what rule I broke. He spends 10 minutes looking through the school's code of conduct and comes up with nothing. He spends another 10 minutes looking through the identical online copy, still nothing. I'll be right back. He goes to talk to the principal, comes back a few minutes later, and says, okay. It looks like you didn't break any rules, so we're not going to give you any punishment. Your teacher will be instructed to give you an A+ for this assignment as you completed it exactly as instructed, just. And in a very pleading tone, please don't do anything like this again. I was at university at the time, and it was late one evening that I received the call I had been dreading for weeks. My grandma had, mentally, never faltered over the years, a solid rock of intelligence that had slowly become bound to her chair as she and I got older, so her death shocked me in a way nothing else really ever has. Felt like I'd come adrift from reality, that a fundamental law of the universe had been broken. After all, she'd always been there. It didn't make sense for her to die, and as such sought solstice in my friends, and just as importantly, the alcohol my friends possessed. Small note, I was in Scotland and received the call around 10:30 p.m. Scotland prohibits off-license alcohol sales between 10 p.m. and 10 a.m., so I couldn't just get some from the shop. I went round to said friends, a group of girls whose flat I often crashed at after parties, where we talked and drank and watched some Pokemon, and they gradually drifted off to bed until it was just me and a girl we'll call H. Only a few weeks before H's crush on me had been discovered, so between the alcohol lowering our inhibitions and our intent to keep me distracted from my grandma's death, we found ourselves helping each other undress in her bedroom. For whatever reason, we decided to skip the condom and go straight to the fun bit, despite her having a shoebox half full of condoms as I found out later, but this time something was wrong. As soon as it, and by it, I mean my dick, went in I felt pain, like something had torn through the skin, and when I stopped H and pulled it out we discovered blood everywhere and an 1.5 inch long tear in my foreskin. Note, this wasn't the frenulum, banjo string, that snapped, which many men suffer at some point, with or without frenulum brave, but an actual tear in the side of my foreskin. I immediately responded to the situation, as any sensible person would, by going into shock and then dry heaving. H responded by panicking about how to get me to hospital without letting her roommates know I tore my dick while we were having fun, not just because of how embarrassing the situation was already, but also because she had a boyfriend who was currently in Ireland. Once I'd pulled myself together and got dressed, so I didn't have to look at the poor mutilated abomination that had until recently been my pride and various girls' joy, I suggested we tell them I had nearly fainted and started throwing up, truism, and while we thought it was just the shock of my grandma's death hitting me, not true, we were going to run down to the hospital to check it out, true, but referring to a different it. Thankfully, they bought it, or if they didn't they haven't brought it up since, and we made our escape. Out the front door we stepped to find the weather had decided to match my misery with pouring rain and gale force winds. We ran round the corner, into the car, and set off for the hospital. Some of you will be familiar with Edinburgh, so when I say we were going to A&E from Slateford will immediately know our route of choice, Edinburgh Bypass. For those unfamiliar, the bypass is a dual carriageway that more or less encircles Edinburgh, and like any motorway in the UK is fairly inaccessible on foot, a point of significance that should let you make a guess as to where this is going. Sure enough, about a mile along the bypass, we hear a clunk and start to decelerate. H's car was around 15 years old and fully expected to break down completely within the next year, but having it happen at such an inconvenient time was, well, incredibly inconvenient. Luckily, this being the age of mobile phones, we could call H's roommates, explain that the car had broken down, and get a number for a taxi firm from them. The taxi company, however, refused to pick us up, saying that we were about a mile down from the A71 junction westbound wasn't precise enough for it to be worth them sending a taxi out, apparently. I can only suppose they, and the company we called after them, didn't trust their drivers to find the only broken down car, and probably only car, period, on the bypass. We however were growing increasingly cold, what with it being the middle of the night, in Scotland, in late autumn, during a storm, and so were relieved when the third company agreed to send a car out with only a small amount of pleading. After a shortest wait, the taxi arrived and whisked us away to our salvation, A&E. Upon entering A&E, we found it to be surprisingly devoid of drunks for the middle of the night, and so H went off to call the police and report her car so it could be collected, and I went up to the front desk, where I had to tell two very professional middle-aged ladies my full name and date of birth, that I'd torn my foreskin having fun, and that no, I wasn't using protection when it happened. They handed me a printed sheet of paper, told me to go through some double doors and to hand the paper to the first nurse I encountered. I went through the doors, saw lots of people in color-coded scrubs, and not having a clue what they meant walked up to someone who didn't look too busy and asked if they were a nurse. "No," he replied, taking the paper, "but I'll take a gander for you." On seeing the actual contents of the paper, a look of horror crossed his face, a slight widening of the eyes and drop of the corners of his mouth. "Doctors and nurses everywhere, please make sure your poker face is better than his was, because knowing your injuries freak out medical professionals does not inspire the slightest bit of confidence. I'm not sure if this needs an examination or not," he managed to say, which was obviously overheard when a land whale of a matron snatched it out of his hands with a, "Give me a look, I'll tell you if it needs examining." The land whale had no sympathy at all. "Again, doctors and nurses, don't be this either. You may have seen something 1,000 times before, but that doesn't make it any less bad for the patient," but did tell me it would need an examination, and offered me the choice of a male or female doctor to look at it. As I wanted even a slight shred of sympathy, I opted for the male doctor, and shortly after was pulling my trousers down for a young man who was very carefully trying to not show any emotion. Credit to him, on seeing the damage he only winced a little bit. Quick bio lesson: dicks are mostly made up of spongy white tissue that expands when filled with blood, so when you tear a hole in the side it looks infected and pussy, a lot worse than it actually is, and informed me that it would heal on its own, but to wash it 3 to 4 times a day, and not engage in any form of activity for the next 2 weeks. He left, I dressed, and while walking out saw a gaggle of male and female doctors talking to the one who had just seen me. The women were giggling like 12-year-old girls, and the men had a variety of pained and horrified expressions. I walked out of there knowing that I had provided a story that would entertain and horrify the hospital for at least a week, and that was without any of the backstory. I also walked out pretty much as I had entered, in a significant amount of discomfort, so after finding H, we immediately jumped in a taxi and went to our respective homes so I could metaphorically lick my wound until it had healed enough for her to literally lick it. Epilogue: 2 weeks later, everything had healed and was fully functioning bar a new centimeter or so scar on little Dicus ripus. I celebrated by successfully having fun with H, and then going back to sleeping around as usual. Ever since that night, when I'm out with friends and one of them starts whinging about how their day has just been the worst, I'm on hand to say, once upon a time, my grandma died, marking the high point of the worst night of my life. People tend to stop whinging pretty quickly.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.